Recently, I decided to replace the tone generator capacitors in my beloved 1957 B3 that I've had for about 26 years. Several years ago, I rebuilt the preamp and line box, but the tone had become extremely muddy and a capacitor recap was well overdue. I made a short video of the process of recapping, which might be of interest. Here's the organ looking rather forlorn and prepped for its multiple capacitor transplant operation, 53 in total. And I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit so that you can see all the Tonewheel filter assemblies sitting on top of the generator. And I'll switch to another view which is slightly more stable. Here's a better, more stable and slightly clearer view of the filter assemblies. The big challenge is not to snag and break the little transformer wires. Some of them are very, very fine gauge and it's quite difficult to see them. And I can tell you from experience that they're easily broken. The redeeming thing is that the replacement capacitors are much smaller, so it does simplify the job just a little bit. These are the capacitors that I'm going to use to replace the original ones. They're a match set and exactly replicate the values of the capacitors being taken out. They come from BB Organs in Minnesota. BB is Bill Brown, who is a consummate expert on editing Tonewheel. So I do recommend them, and it is worth getting capacitors of the right value so you don't compromise on quality of sound. A quick word about getting the keyboard in place. It's very simple. Take out the 4 bolts from underneath, 2 either side, which hold the keyboard down. Detach the music stand, fascia, and then remove the run and start switches. It's a little bit fiddly. When they're detached, put them back on the little steel plate and drop them down through the back onto some plastic. Then you need to undo 2 screws underneath the front wooden rail, and sorry about my terrible camera work, but there's 2 machine screws here which go through and then screw to the keyboard assembly. So once you've taken those out, push all of the drawbars in so they don't foul anything, then push the keyboard firmly back as far as it'll go. Then you can pull it up and chock it with 2 pieces of timber or whatever, which are cut to the exact size so they fit snugly under there, and you will find that you have excellent access to the capacitors. This is the first capacitor that I removed, and you can see the value it should be. In fact, it measured at 0.545 microfarad, which means that it was way off the filtering the fundamental frequency. So the fundamental would be attenuated and all sorts of harmonics would bleed through, which would explain why the organ was sounding so muddy. I just finished replacing the first capacitor, and it's Tonewheel 61, which is C5 with the fundamental drawbar pulled out. So I'll run it up in a minute and see if it works. As you can see, Tonewheel filter 61 is conspicuous by its absence. When I ran up the generator, I found that C5 wasn't sounding, and doing some continuity tests, I found that one of the leads on the transformer had broken. Can't imagine how. So now it's been taken out and it's on the bench awaiting repair. Here we have a naked Tonewheel filter transformer looking rather undignified because I've jammed it into my vise to open up the windings a bit by bending the end tags down. And I have to say, testament to 66-year-old nylon that it hasn't broken. My challenge is to attach a short length of wire to where I'm trying to point the screwdriver, or pointer rather, and it's about 2 millimeters at absolute very most of wire exposed, but it's coming from the center of the winding, so I can't pull any more out, otherwise it'll break. So somehow I've got to strip back the enamel coating and solder on a length of copper wire, enamel copper wire. So in the next shot we will find out whether I was successful or not. Thankfully, with a lot of patience and some very delicate microsurgery, I've managed to reattach the wire, and I had to pinch a couple of turns off the transformer because the original wire from the tag was now too short. So what I've got to do now is get the laminations back in, and then when I've done that, it can go back into the chassis. And here we are with the laminations in, and the poor old nylon tags or brackets at the end looking a bit sad, but they'll flatten out when I screw it back in place. Tonewheel filter 61 is back in place. It checks out electrically, and I've run up the generator to make sure that it's sounding okay on the keyboard, which it is. And so I realised that I've just got to be that much more careful when I'm replacing the rest of the capacitors. I've finally finished putting in all the new capacitors without any further mishaps, and I've checked that all 91 tone wheels are working correctly. This B3 has had very light domestic use in its lifetime, and the generator runs extremely quietly. You can't even hear it once the console's all closed up. I trained in old world electronics in the early 60s, but with solid state gaining traction it was a dying art, so it's great to reuse all the practical experience I gained. Keyboard's now bolted down. I've just got to reattach the start and run switches to the music stand fascia, attach that with 4 screws, screw the back on, and basically that's it. It's taken me about 2 days end to end, but there was a learning curve along with it. So it's all gone very well. The organ now sounds absolutely fantastic, and it looks beautiful, having had a deep clean and polish that was at least 10 years overdue. I've since sold the B3 to an accomplished keyboard player from Leeds, Bob Birch. Bob has enjoyed a diverse 30-year career in music that is very multifaceted. Do check out his website, bobbirchmusic.com. To illustrate the post-generator recap tonal quality, Bob has recorded 3 short tracks, and these will follow now.